Hello class, this is Friday, November 6th. This is Latin 201, Professor Barbara Wyman. And today we are going to cover some new grammar found in chapter 21 in Latin via Ovid. And there's quite a bit of scary looking grammar in this chapter. Actually, it's kind of a scary looking vocabulary list too. But we're not going to be too concerned about that in this video. What we're going to look at today is the most important grammar that we're going to get, and it's how to form the other participles. We've learned about the perfect passive participle, and I have a board to show you how to form these other participles. But before I turn to that board, I want to show you that on this page, you have a couple of other new grammar. This section 118 on page 184, conjugation of pharaoh, apharaoh, alpharaoh, it's just something to look at. The verb pharaoh is a very common verb. It means to bear or carry. And in its present tense, it's irregular. Pharaoh, pharis, pharit, pharimus, pharites, pharunt. Its principal parts are a little bit wacky. Pharaoh, phare, tuli, latum. So just glance over that. You can see then its other, the perfect tenses, as usual, are formed regularly. This verb is found a lot in its combination forms with its prefixes. Okay, so just read over that. It explains it here. Apharaoh is odd plus pharaoh, to bear towards. Apharaoh is ob plus pharaoh, to bear away, to carry away. And this verb is common, and its forms can be confusing because the perfect form is so different from the first principal part. So just something to be aware of. Most dictionaries will list these forms because I think probably even the Romans got confused with this a little bit. Then on section 119, we see third declension adjectives of 1 and 3 termination. We already talked a little bit about third declension adjectives in a previous lesson. This one just shows you how that there are third declension adjectives which have one ending for masculine, feminine, and neuter. So they're called adjectives of one termination, versus our good old reliable bonus aum has 3 terminations. So it's just sort of a fancy way to sort of designate these adjectives. So there are also third declension adjectives with 3 terminations, one for masculine, one for feminine, and one for neuter. But that's in the nominative form, basically, if you can see. The rest of it is pretty much declined like you would expect for a third declension noun, even though this is an adjective. So you'll see ingens, ingentis, ingenti, ingentem. And remember, in third declension adjectives, the dative and the ablative both end in an I. There's no E. See, the rest of this looks really familiar. Third declension adjectives are always I stem, so they'll have the IUM in the genitive. And the neuter nominative plural will end in an A as normal, but it'll be ingentia. So that's a little bit different. If you'll notice, the adjectives are 3 terminations. It's only in the nominative that it is anything wacky. Other than that, it's just going to be a third declension, like the third declension noun endings. So that's a little scary looking, but it does follow a pattern. The reason this is important is because present active participles, which is what we're learning today, are considered adjectives of 1 termination. That means they are going to decline like ingens, and they're going to be listed different in the vocabulary. So let's look at the adjectives. And you'll be able to recognize these by how they're listed. So we know we'll recognize our good old faithful ardu, us, aum. That's first and second declension adjective. Avidus, aum. That's a good old faithful first and second declension adjective versus acer, acris, acre. That's a third declension adjective because that's what first and second declension adjectives look like. But this is a third declension adjective of 3 terminations, which is declined on the next page. And then we have crudelis e. That's the type that we got in the previous chapter. That's a third declension adjective of 2 terminations. So you can flip back to chapter 20, I think it is, or it might be 19 to see how that's declined. But they're basically just third declension adjectives. Here, felix, felicis is a third declension adjective of 1 termination, as is declined on the next page, in like ingens and gentis. And this is what a third declension adjective of 1 termination looks like in the vocabulary. It just looks like basically like a third declension noun. And that's what present active participles are going to be. So, geminus aum, first and second declension. In felix, in felicis, third declension adjective of 1 termination. In gens and gentis, ditto. Mutus aum, first declension adjective. In first and second declension adjective. Recens, recentis, third declension adjective of 1 termination. Superus aum, wanus aum. So a little wacky, but not too bad. And now I want to look at our board. I showed you how to do these, and then we'll look back at Norma again. So forming Latin participles, of course, we have our 4 principal parts, and we're used to the 4th principal part, which is the perfect passive participle, amatus aum, call it the PPP. But now we're going to find out that we have also present and future participles. The one we're learning in this chapter is the present active participle. It's really easy to form. You go from the infinitive, our good old familiar whacking off the RE, and then you turn it into a third declension adjective. You add the NS and the NTIS. So it's amans, amantes. So it's a little thing you just have to do to that stem, but then it becomes a third declension adjective with participle. And the active form means loving, like the loving mother. Means PPP means having been loved, the loved mother. The PAP, present active participle, would be the loving mother. Okay, so now we are going to go, well, there's the the perfect passive participle. Now we're going to go down present perfect to the future. This is the active column. There is a future active participle. It's really easy to form. It basically is the amatus aum that you insert a UR. So see the future, futurus. This UR actually comes from that Latin word, and we'll talk about that later. But amatorus aum, you just insert that UR. So it's amatorus aum, amatora, amatorum. And it means about to love. So loving, having been loved, and about to love. So that's an adjective. So the girl about to love the Latin language signs up for Latin classes. So it's an adjective meaning about to love. Latin also has a construction called the future passive participle. future passive adjective. It's got another name called the gerundive, which we'll talk about later. But you also have to form that. Amon du sa You have to insert this nd to the same ama from up here. So amandus is declined like a first and second declension adjective. Future passive participle, and that means about to be loved because it's passive, okay? So Amanda, the name Amanda, ND, is a girl about to be loved. Agenda are things to be done. We have a lot of these forms that have come straight into English. Propaganda, things to be propagated. So the ND is the designation for a future passive participle. So we're going to work with those. They're all declined like a first and second declension adjective. All of these, except for the pap. They're declined like a third declension adjective. All right, so now let's go back to Norma. Let me turn the page. We are on page 183, and we've looked at this. And so here is the page where Norma gives you the participle so you can see the Normine explanation. Then she gives you the forms of the PAP, the present active participle, in all the different conjugations, but they're pretty straightforward. So, you whack off the RE and you add the NS and the NTIS. And then these present active participles or adjectives, she's going to give you several examples of how they work, so you can look at those. And there's an irregular one. We're just going to ignore that for right now. But I want to show you something else, is that because they are active, present active participles, they can have direct objects. And that's what makes up a participial phrase. So this is Orpheus tendens stretching his arms. So the tendens is the present active participle. You can recognize it by the NS modifying Orpheus. Orpheus stretching. Okay, but what is he stretching? His arms. So that's the direct object of this participle. We have that also in English. The horse drinking water. It's the horse drinking. It's the adjective modifying the horse. He's drinking water. But here, Orpheus tendens brachia and struggling kertons from kerto kertare. So that's a pap. So they both modify Orpheus. He's stretching his arms and struggling to grab her because Eurydice is falling back down into the underworld. He has held nothing but airs. Air. He's just grabbing vacant air. So that's how a present active participle will be able to take a direct object. This chapter is quite difficult. We are not going to do all of it, but I am going to give you an assignment where you're going to look for third declension adjectives or participles. I see one right away. So this is the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. Let's see where I just saw it. So he's descending among the shades to discover among the shades her. Okay, so Orpheus is looking for Eurydice, who has died and gone to the underworld. And he's going to approach towards Proserpinam at Plotunam, so Proserpina and Pluto, who are holding Tenentem. So that's the perfect active, the present active participle from teneo, and this modifying Pluto and proserpinam, and they're both in the accusative because of the direct objects, but they're modified by this present active participle holding the rule of the shades. Okay, so he has gone toward Proserpina and Pluto, holding the rule of the shades, and he has said, "O gods, having been placed below the earth." Okay, I see another one right here. The paps are really easy to recognize with their NTS. The cause of my way is my spouse, whom the serpent has killed and has taken away. That's that obstulate, that obstulate, that verb we just looked at, irregular, has taken away her years, her growing years. So that's the pap from cresco crescere, the growing years. Okay, has taken away her growing years. More news. So trying to see if I glance down and see any more. Oh, there is dico, dicere, dicentem. See, that's the accusative. Speaking. Okay, so the the bloodless souls, bloodless souls, they were hearing him, Orpheus, speaking such things. Dicentem is the pat modifying him. So the bloodless souls were hearing him speaking such things, and they were crying. This is the very famous story of Orpheus going to the underworld, and all the sinners in the underworld are going to have a moment of relief because they're going to listen to him playing his lyre. So there's quite a few other participles in here. Actually, this is a pretty challenging translation, and I will probably just assign a little bit of this, but that's enough for one video.